The MAGA movement is fundamentally full of hypocrisy and stupidity. This is a party of contradiction, praising the First and Second Amendment, saying they cherish the Constitution while violating and attacking all of those principles every single day in every one of their actions. And Donald Trump makes that clear with the entirety of his presidency, but it wasn't him who Jamie Raskin singled out when delivering a brutal takedown of the way MAGA contradicts everything they claim to love about the Constitution. He called out Lauren Boebert for her praise of the First and Second Amendment that, of course, she and the rest of MAGA always turns their back on. And we are going to get into that takedown from Jamie Raskin. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way, and it really does mean a lot to me. Now, I want to check out this great takedown from Jamie Raskin, and then we're going to talk about all of the ways that MAGA is going against their principles, or whatever principles they claim to have, right after.
In 2022, shocking levels of gun violence caused Congress to come together after decades of inaction to pass the first major piece of gun safety legislation in 28 years. Ever since President Biden signed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act into law, and with the efforts of the ATF, we've made substantial gains in reversing the gun violence epidemic. We ended 2024 with a 25% drop in nationwide homicides compared to 2022. And of course, firearms are involved in more than 80% of murders in the country. According to the Office of Gun Violence Prevention's one-year progress report, in September of last year, more than 600 defendants had been charged under our new gun trafficking and straw purchasing laws, and 900 firearm transfers to people under the age of 21 were prevented by enhanced background checks. The key point is that this law and other Biden administration regulations saved thousands of lives, contributing to 3,500 fewer murders between 2023 and 2024 without ever once infringing on the Second Amendment. And we know this because the Supreme Court never invalidated any part of the Bipartisan Safe Communities Act or any other Biden administration gun safety rule as a violation of the Second Amendment. On the contrary, they've all been deemed to be constitutional. Yet our colleagues continue to insist that common sense gun safety laws of this type violate the Second Amendment. But the Second Amendment doesn't protect the right of access to a firearm without a violent criminal background check, or the right to purchase machine guns or military-style assault weapons. The Supreme Court, including in the DC versus Heller decision, has repeatedly stated that reasonable regulations of firearms to protect public safety are consistent with the Second Amendment. But our colleagues want to preempt state and local law and force Americans to accept more dangerous weapons in their community, all under the guise of protecting the Second Amendment. I challenge my colleagues to explain how any of the Biden administration reforms actually violate the Second Amendment, because no court ever said they did. The problem is that some of our colleagues have completely deformed and misstated what the Second Amendment stands for. Their now infamous insurrectionist theory says that the Second Amendment gives you the right to overthrow the government. Our former colleague Matt Gaetz said the Second Amendment, quote, is about maintaining within the citizenry the ability to maintain an armed rebellion against the government if that becomes necessary. This purported right to overthrow the government means that the people must enjoy access to munitions equivalent to that of the arsenal possessed by the government. As my friend Representative Chip Roy says, the Second Amendment was, quote, designed purposefully to empower the people to resist the force of tyranny used against them. And my friend Lauren Boebert says that the Second Amendment, quote, has nothing to do with hunting unless you're talking about hunting tyrants, maybe. Despite all of this pseudo-revolutionary rhetoric about how the Constitution provides a right of civil insurrection, the actual Constitution, in a half dozen different places, treats insurrection and rebellion not as protected rights, but as serious and dangerous offenses against our government and against our people. Article 1 gives Congress the power to call forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. The Republican Guarantee Clause in Article 4 tells the U.S. to guarantee a Republican form of government to the states and protect them, quote, against domestic violence. These provisions followed Shays' Rebellion, an armed uprising in Massachusetts in the 1780s, which the founders strongly condemned and which influenced the writing of the Constitution. The Constitution thoroughly rejects the right-wing fantasy that random bands of disgruntled citizens can claim the powers of a militia to commit violent acts against the police. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 16 reserves, quote, to the states respectively, the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. This intergovernmental cooperation is how we come to have what the Second Amendment calls for in its first clause, a well-regulated militia. This means well-regulated by the government, as the Supreme Court has repeatedly said. The Proud Boys and Oath Keepers are not a militia. A private militia is a contradiction in terms. In 1886, the Supreme Court upheld a state law criminalizing private paramilitary groups, and every state in the Union today bans private militias. A militia is not the reserve power of the people to attack the government. On the contrary, it is the instrument by which the federal and state governments can suppress violent insurrections against the government. Now, today, when I point out these problems with their theory to my distinguished colleagues, they generally fall back on two responses. One is they will quote Patrick Henry, who said, "Give me liberty or give me death," which is great because that was a great bumper sticker in the 18th century. But Patrick Henry was an anti-federalist who opposed the ratification of the Constitution. So that's like quoting speeches by Jefferson Davis to settle the meaning of the 14th Amendment. They also invoke, more plausibly, the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence for the idea that after a long train of abuses and usurpations, an aggrieved people have the right to alter or abolish the bonds holding them to a tyrannical government. Now that's true, of course, but it's irrelevant because the revolutionaries undoubtedly asserted their right not as a right under the British Constitution or the Magna Carta, but as a matter of natural right to overthrow a tyrannical government. That's very different from saying the Constitution itself guarantees the right to have the means to overthrow the government. If you think that the 2020 presidential election, for example, which Joe Biden won by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232, is an exercise of tyranny akin to King George's tyranny against the colonists, by all means, you can come down and beat up our police officers and try to overthrow the government. But if we catch you and we stop you, we will prosecute you under the full force of the law and put you in jail, at least until the next president decides to pardon the people who've done that.
So as we've always come to expect at this point from Jamie Raskin, just a perfect argument and synopsis of what MAGA is all about. They turn their back on their values, whatever values that is they claim to have, and they fundamentally misunderstand history and what the American story is actually about. I can't count how many times Donald Trump or J.D. Vance or whomever misquotes or misattributes or misunderstands the values that they're claiming to hold. And chief among them is their conversation around free speech. Donald Trump is actively repressing the free press right now. He's actively suppressing media outlets who go against him. Donald Trump is a picture of attacking the First Amendment. What Donald Trump wants, what J.D. Vance wants, what all of MAGA wants is to say the heinous things that people find so gross about them and get away with it. They don't want speech. They don't want to encourage dissent. They don't want to encourage discussion. They want people to fall in line with them. And it's the reason this ridiculous conversation around protesting Tesla just sounds so stupid coming from MAGA. And it sounds especially stupid coming from Scott Jennings, who got called out for it right here.
Terrorism, people ought to be put in jail and left there for a very long time and be taught a lesson.
So when they do it to a Tesla dealership, it's really bad. But when they do it to the halls of Congress, we should pardon them. Is that your position?
No, I've never. I don't
Are
support.
we okay with the January 6th pardons?
I know you haven't been around for a while, so let me educate you about my position about January the 6th.
I'm so sorry.
Let me educate you.
You don't need to patronize
You don't need to.
me.
You don't need to be condescending to me.
I'm
So
not
let me
condescending.
educate you about my position. You want to attack me? Let me finish it. Let me finish it. Let me finish it.
Let's do this.
Now, I think it is so perfect to connect the point that Jamie Raskin made about insurrection with, of course, Scott Jennings' defense of insurrectionists. And in that clip, he got all high and mighty and says, you don't know what I've said about the January 6th insurrectionists. But it was only a few weeks ago when he was saying that their lives have been ruined. They're financially ruined. Their reputation is all gone. Yeah, they attacked our Capitol and smeared their poop on the walls. I'm sorry if their friends and family don't like them anymore. I'm sorry if it's hard for those cop-beating insurrectionists to get jobs. I guess they're team players when the team goal is to hang Mike Pence. That's probably not going to work in an office space, Scott. These people are ridiculous. And chief among them really is J.D. Vance, the guy who went to Europe to lecture them about free speech, only to come home and aid and abet Donald Trump in his attack on the press. That's why what he said right here is so stupid.
We have to ask ourselves the questions as leaders. Are we willing to defend people even if we disagree with what they say? If you're not willing to do that, I don't think you're fit to lead Europe or the United States of America.
If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you.
Exactly right.
You said it at the same conference.
That's exactly right. There's nothing that we can do for you if you're terrified.
Now, it's not just JD's free speech bit that rings so hollow, but listen to that last thing he said at the end. You shouldn't be running from your voters. If you're running from your voters, we can't help you. That is all we have seen Republicans do over the past 3 weeks. Abandon town halls, run out of town halls, cancel town halls. We saw a Republican in Arizona say that you couldn't come to his town hall if you were a Democrat or an independent. A Democrat or an independent. That's running from your voters. These are people who fundamentally either don't understand or don't care about what free speech actually means. They want to protect the dissent that is disgusting. They want to protect the dissent that is dangerous. They don't want to protect the dissent that disrupts the status quo for them. You should want to protect the speech that you like the least. Now, that doesn't mean dangerous speech, but that means speech that is unpopular. And when it's unpopular with J.D. Vance, he doesn't want it to be free anymore because he doesn't actually care. And it's also because he is dumb. I hate him. But that's just how I feel about it. We don't always have to make the argument so perfect. Sometimes we can let them get a little bit emotional, and we're certainly going to do that, calling out these pieces on this show every single day. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button. You can leave a like on this video. And if you stuck around to the end, you can drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.